A very good evening to everyone, and welcome to this very special session of D Talks or Disruptive Literacy Talks. I am your host, Mashood Bhatt. And today we are, we've very recently completed 50 talks here at D Talks and have had some phenomenal speakers. But we begin the second half of our century of talks with a phenomenal speaker. And when we are talking about disruptive solutions which can help us meet the SDG 4 goals of universal foundation literacy and numeracy, what we really need is people who are entrepreneurial, who are disruptive in their approach, and but also they are able to help children learn and read on a very large scale. And the kind of people that the movement really needs is exactly like our speaker for this session. She is the recipient of the Literarian Award for Outstanding Service to the American Literary Community. She's also the founder and CEO of a path-breaking social enterprise, First Book, which provides millions of books and educational resources every year to children from the underserved and the low-income families. And the network of First Book has really grown across schools, programs, churches, institutions, not just in the United States, but also in Canada, Peru, Haiti, Jamaica, India, and many other countries. With this, we would like to welcome today's speaker, Ms. Kyle Zimmer. Kyle, it's an absolute honor to have you here at Detox.
It's wonderful to be here. I'm so delighted to be included.
So Kyle, you have been, you've had such a, like a illustrious journey, and being a person from the legal background to becoming a leading social entrepreneur, and you've represented at some of the biggest forums internationally at World Economic Forum, so many awards and accolades in your name. So if when you look back at your journey, what was it that really motivated you and led you to be a social entrepreneur, and especially with respect to literacy and books and children? If you'd like to start the conversation from there, please.
Sure, I'd be happy to. I think these things start very early in our lives. I think I was raised in an area of the U.S. That's around the Appalachian Mountains in Ohio. It's an area that struggles a lot. The opioid crisis that has hit the news both domestically and internationally has hit that area the hardest because it struggles with educational barriers. It struggles with economic development issues. A lot of the same issues, they look different in that region, but there are a lot of the same issues that worldwide populations struggle with. Now, I was lucky, and I grew up in a family of people who really prioritized education. They believed, and I believe, that education is the one sure path out of poverty. And so I grew up in a house. We weren't wealthy, but I had a home that was full of books, full of people talking about ideas, and with a mother who was very clear that you didn't sit it out. You don't sit these issues out. When you identify an issue that's important to you, you roll up your sleeves, you put your boots on, and you get on out there onto the field. And so I was really raised to be an activist and with education at its heart. So I think I came into this quite naturally.
Right, and it's an absolutely phenomenal journey. And when you say that naturally it was you were brought up to be an activist. If you look at when you were thinking of, there's so many things where you could address, because so many problems in the world. What was that one thing which really made you feel that, okay, it's going to be about kids, and it's going to be about reading, and the whole journey that really inspired you to start First Book? What was that trigger for you?
Well, I think, I grew up, I was born in 1960, so I'll let you guys do the math on how old I am. It'll terrify us all, but that was the heart of the civil rights era in the United States. And so I grew up in that atmosphere and really with, family members deeply focused on that. And I became a lawyer. And I've always had rooted not just in education, but in civil justice. And Washington, D.C., as I was practicing law in the late 80s, was really struggling. It was the crack epidemic had hit the city. There was a lot of violence. And again, I was raised to roll my sleeves up. So I went in after work and I started tutoring at a soup kitchen. And I'm not a teacher, I'm pretty good at business and I'm a good lawyer, but education, teaching is not my gift. So I would sit there and I would think at that program, every night you'd go in and there'd be like 50 kids and they'd have those wonderful, hopeful smiles, and they were looking for a place to hang out that was safe and, of course, something to eat, and adults who were consistent and in their lives. And I kept thinking, there just aren't books. Like I could make some kind of an educational contribution if I just had books to read every time I was here. And so I really made myself a student of the access to books. What does that mean? What does it look like in low-income neighborhoods? Why is the publishing industry? What does pricing look like for the industry? Why are books $19 for premium picture books? I started really just studying it, and I got more deeply into it. And, and you begin sharpening your pencil and imagining a more systemic solution. So that was really my way into this issue.
Right. That's absolutely inspiring. And as like you mentioned that you were really inspired to be an activist and to, with all the challenges that you were seeing around you, and you chose children and reading, and the problem of inequity when it comes to access to reading. When you went about establishing First Book, almost 30 years ago, and you chose a particular model for the organization and set it up as a not-for-profit social enterprise. What was the motivation behind that, and how would you say that like a social enterprise is something which kind of is either different from the traditional understanding of not-for-profit organization? So what was the vision back then?
Well, I think, and you guys certainly know this as well as I do, I think that there's a role for every kind of model. These problems that we are chasing, we need everybody in, and we need traditional charitable models. We need the government. We need everybody involved. Now, as I began learning about access to books, and, First Book does a lot of other things too, and I'd love to talk about that at a later point in this conversation. But as I began learning about the publishing industry, I began to see that there were lots of organizations that were doing their best to get books out for free to local organizations serving kids in need. And I love that. And those folks are soldiers in the same army with us. But what I was struggling with was you're never going to be able to scale that adequately, and every year raise the level of books and the quality of books, given the vast population of kids in need who are waiting for these resources. So I really began with my two co-founders to to really sharpen our pencils and get our calculators out and say, how do we reinvent the publishing industry pricing models in order to push that threshold price down as low as it can possibly go? How can we design something in a way that is a win-win-win, that brings the publishers to the table in a way that makes it possible for them to do it in a sustained way? How do we do it in a way that brings nonprofits and Title I classrooms, which is a poverty designation in the US? How do we bring everybody to the table in a way that makes business sense so that it's infinitely scalable, and so we can eventually reach every kid who's waiting for us? And that's the distinction for me between social enterprise and nonprofit, that's more traditional charitable models.
And the journey of the past 3 decades, I mean, it's phenomenal that today First Book has a network of almost 500,000 educators.
Yeah.
And the goal is to almost quadruple it and reach 2 million, which is just seems you're like kind of steamrolling towards that target. But if you talk about this huge network of educators, would you like to share a bit more about what does this community look like? Who are these people, and where do they come from? How do they get to know about First Book, and how do they become part of this family?
Sure. I think I believe deeply in people power, and the organization First Book believes deeply in people power, and that shows because at the heart of our organization is this network you've just described. We've hit 520,000 members. We're growing by 1,000 new members every week. And who these people are, these are teachers in Title I classrooms. These are librarians in public libraries. These are people who work in homeless shelters and healthcare settings. These are even people who are running barbershops in their local community when they are serving at least 70% kids in need. That's our benchmark. They have to have a way of showing us, a way of proving to us that they serve at least 70% kids in poverty. And so what happens is by pulling this together, by pulling this vast group together, you really can build tremendous strength for people who have never had market strength before. And that's, that lesson of bringing people together and unifying them, that's not new to social enterprise. It's not new to First Book. It's not new in the universe. This is over history. Every major movement has been based on this, whether it's labor unions, whether it's Mahatma Gandhi, whether it's Martin Luther King, whether it's the power of unifying a broad spectrum of people and bringing them together around core pillars that they do agree on. That's where this real strength is. So this is the first time in the US that anybody has tried to unify the full spectrum of people serving kids in poverty, from the most informal setting to formal schools. And that has brought us the strength to build these 3 interlocking social enterprises. It has given us the ability to launch, for example, the First Book Marketplace, which is an e-commerce site that serves only this network. And by having a large unified market, it gives us tremendous market strength to go to the publishers and say, we are serving this new market that you haven't traditionally reached. We are serving this market. Their needs are different. We need books at a lower pricing. We will buy on a non-contingent, a non-returnable basis to make it more certain revenue to the publishers. We really used our market strength and our confidence in who we were serving, we really used that as a major lever to drive the price down and to elevate the content by, in a way that's more and more relevant to the educators we're serving and the kids they are serving. So it's that network that you referenced, that is the heart and soul of everything we do. And we listen to them every single day. We have our ear right there, listening to everything they need, everything that's keeping them up at night.
That absolutely phenomenal. And it's kind of exciting to learn about this wonderful community which you have, and such a diverse community. I mean, all the way from full-time educators to people who are serving in different roles, including you mentioned barbershops as well. So I'm just trying to imagine that I'm going for a haircut, and then I can read a couple of chapters as well from there. Is that what it looks like?
It does. These are great. These are great programs, Masood. These are programs where everyone is slightly different, which is what's thrilling about it, because it's coming from the grassroots up, but there are barbershops where they just run a program for kids, and they'll say, if you come in and read a book, you'll get a free haircut. Anything to get those kids in, because getting a haircut, excuse me, by a barber, sitting in that big chair. I remember with my own sons, that was a big deal when they were little. And so bringing them in and giving them that community embrace, that's a wonderfully powerful thing. All kids need 360-degree surround sound of educational opportunities. They need all of us in formal and informal settings saying, talking about reading, of course, in a formal way, but also recognizing that reading's fun. It's a great thing to do. This isn't just an instruction that's being handed out by your teacher in a formal setting that you are required to read. This is something we all need to embrace. The storytelling, this has been at the heart of humanity in every culture, whether it's based on oral tradition or written. This is what drives the movie industry. This is what drives, the music industry. A lot of the songs we listen to, we fall in love with stories, and we have to help our next generation fall in love with stories. And that takes all of us.
That's very inspiring, and it's like a movement of people. It's a people's movement, which we here at Global Dream as well. We do believe that if suppose India has 74% of literate people, then isn't it possible that every person who can read and write make the remaining rest of them literate? And there is a very powerful message which you have shared with this example, that a people's movement, it doesn't mean that people have to be there 24 hours working to teach.
Right.
They can just do their bit.
That's right. It can be a neighbor, it can be a brother or sister. It has to be organic. It has to be all of us.
True. The story of first book, it's remarkable, and it started with a focus on books and literacy, but over the years it seems that the team and the organization and the mission has also kind of broadened the focus to address educational equity as a whole. And like you mentioned that these are the equity challenge, and it has been a cause which you have been very passionate about since a very young age. So would you like to share about why the focus, which started with access to reading, etc., it's also looked at educational equity as a whole, and how is First Book addressing these issues?
Sure. The deeper you get into these issues, it's It's sort of like you pull a string on a sweater, and the whole thing, you start realizing that it's all connected, and it's quite the same for our experience in educational equity. You are very correct that we started our organization focused on literacy, focused on access to books, and that's still very much at the heart of what we do. But as we got going, of course, we began, again, as I said earlier, we really began listening. We began realizing that the real power of what we were building it was based in the practitioners, the network, the people in those classrooms and after school programs and preschool programs. And we began surveying them and saying, what do you need? What do you want? What's holding you up? What are the barriers you're seeing? And we really began listening to them. And so focus groups and just lots of interaction. And as we did, they started saying, all kinds of things. They started educating us, and they would say, for starters, they would tell us what books they wanted and what languages they wanted. And they would say, we want Very Hungry Caterpillar in a bilingual Spanish-English edition. And then we would be able to go out and make that happen. And they would see that that was happening and that we had responded. And so they would get more and more engaged. And so we have a very engaged network of people now. But what we began to understand, and I'll give a couple of quick examples. They would say, for example, kids are hungry when they come to school. They miss breakfast, or they get hungry in the middle of the day or towards the afternoon, and we begin losing them because they can't stay awake. They're hungry. They can't focus. They get cranky, And so First Book began offering non-perishable foods on the First Book Marketplace. First Book, in response to their input, began offering hygiene kits for homeless kids because that was a source of bullying and of significant healthcare issues. So First Book began offering winter coats because in parts of the U.S., when the temperatures drop in the winter, absenteeism rises. And so as we listened to them, they were really building their own marketplace by telling us what they needed and what the kids needed. And so as we got going, we began also realizing that this voice of the network, the data that would come out of that, was something that was missing. It was an additional barrier in the field of educational equity. And so we launched something called First Book Research and Insights, and we launched it about 5 or 6 years ago because we realized that having this massive respondent database was something that was unprecedented, and that ongoing data about what was going on in those learning settings, what was going on in the lives of those kids, how what was going on broadly in the country, how that was affecting kids' lives in the classroom. All of those issues were understudied. And I have said in other forum, we spend more money researching whether our potato chips are crispy and what the consumer response is to a Dorito than we do consistently evaluating the needs and barriers for equitable education. So we've built this arm that is focused on data. It's focused on feedback loops from the field to say what's working and what's not. We've built this so that it's vibrant and strong, and it can inform governmental decisions. It can give feedback to academic, to the development of curriculum. It can give feedback to products that are educational products that are being designed by the private sector. So that was a second barrier that we focused on. And then we began building this third, and really our final major one is called the accelerator. And what we realized is that in these classrooms, in these programs, the educators were missing things. They were being asked to address needs that they were never trained to. They were recognizing, for example, significant mental health issues in their classrooms among their kids, depression, distraction, issues that they could see it, but they had no basic training in it. So we've been able to, through the accelerator, we identify the real leading experts that are really in a research-based way, developing the best strategies for these settings. And we can accelerate the access to those strategies, to that research, to the practitioners in our network. We collapse that lag time between the people who are doing the research and the people who are on the front lines. So those are the three big pillars. And the fundamental thing about First Book is we constantly look at what we've built and we ask ourselves, what is another barrier? What's the next big barrier to equitable education that what we've built can be maneuvered and applied to that next barrier? And that's always what we will do. And I think that's the real strength, because it allows us to continue to evolve our models based on exactly what's going on on the ground.
One very important lesson, which I think you've shared for all budding social entrepreneurs, is also how First Book has been so responsive, elastic, and it has been. It is important to be a good listener if you want to be a social entrepreneur. Because essentially the social enterprise is the true resource that the enterprise is built on is its people who run it. So I think that's a very important lesson which you've shared as well. And one question which every entrepreneur, especially young entrepreneurs, would have is, when is the right time to expand? When is the right time to move beyond the area of operations where you are? And First Book, started in the United States, but it's also expanded into other countries as well. Would you like to share as to what were the factors that that made you and your team decide that, okay, now it's time to go to other countries and new countries, new challenges?
It's very challenging, I think, to move outside of one's home country. I think, for First Book, what we realized is that, it's a funny thing, because you can always talk yourself out of it, right? Because it's complicated, it's scary, and our sector is forever resource starved, so you can always find a reason not to step out. And so I think we all need to hold hands and encourage each other and say it's go forth, because the worst that can happen is you fail in that one little part of what you're doing, right? And the truth is that if you don't fail pretty regularly, you're probably not doing things aggressively enough. You're probably not trying enough new things. Now, having said that, I believe deeply in business discipline. When we step into a new category, we don't just walk off the end of the pier. We're very, very disciplined about it. We write business plans. we reach out to people who are experts in whatever field we're going into, and those business plans, the business plan for the First Book Marketplace from 13 or 14 years ago, it was 37 pages long. I mean, we evaluated the risks to the business proposition. It was a formal business plan. We do some version of that for every single major expansion initiative that we do. And we do a sort of less formal version of it for even the minor things that we just feel like we need to think through. There is something about the discipline of putting yourself through that set of evaluatory questions that really it makes you cross every T and dot every I. And so and the other thing it does that I think is really important inside an organization is that it unifies the vision of the people who are working to build these new components, these new models, right? Because you can sit around a table and you can think after hours of conversation that you all understand where you're headed and what the steps are and things like that. And the problem is it's sort of like archery, where if you're off by an inch at the bow, you're going to be off by a mile at the target. And if you don't line up and ask each other the hard questions when you're in that early phase, people are going to make decisions that don't line up when you're not on the call with them. And you're going to make decisions that don't line up with their vision. So I really believe in the discipline of that. And I think our field needs to elevate our capacities to do that kind of thinking. I think we need to support each other in that. So that's kind of how we approach every major new initiative.
Right. And here I'd like to add two follow-on questions as well. One is about how you mentioned that it's important to hold hands, right, in our area of work. So could you share a bit more about? Did you have, for example, like-minded partners who maybe helped expand the work of First Book in different countries? And what when as a social entrepreneur, what is the ideal kind of a partner when it comes to work in education and literacy? And the second question was also on sustainability. Because that's a major question in the mind of every entrepreneur, that how do we make our organization and work sustainable? So in that aspect, how has First Book figured things out over the years?
Sure. Well, as to the question about partners, I think there are two big ways for me, two big things to share. One is when we work outside of the U.S., our footprint is predominantly the U.S. and Canada. We have an office in Washington, D.C. that is the base of our U.S. operations. We have an office in Toronto that is a basis of our Canadian operations. The rest of our work has been in partnership with organizations on the ground, and it has been intermittent. We haven't built yet, I will say. I look forward to doing it, but we haven't built sustained operations outside of the US and Canada. And I think the idea of partner, so part of the reason why I'm emphasizing that is because I believe deeply that the world does not need one more American, or frankly, any other country, organization to come roaring out with a prefabricated model into other countries and cultures. I think we ought to be more sophisticated and sensitive than that. And so what we need, so partnership is essential to that. That means that should First Book ever grow into India, for example, we've got to be deeply rooted with organizations that are Indian, that have served the Indian population, that and even deeper than that, that have a real feel for what's going on in the classrooms, in the programs, in the lives of the population there. We have no business guessing, and that goes right into the content we would provide. We are very proud of what we do in the U.S. and Canada, but as we were talking about just a little bit ago, that's all based on feedback from practitioners in the U.S. and in Canada. That is not us sitting in Washington imagining that we have all the answers. And so that same philosophy has to be deeply rooted in anything we do. The books need to be culturally relevant. The folks we're holding hands with have to be culturally, deeply rooted in those communities. So that's really important. The second piece of the answer for your partnership question for me is that we have built everything we do based on partners. We didn't come out of the gate and say we're going to start a new set of schools. We didn't say we're going to start a new kind of after-school reading program. What we said is we're going to design something that supports what's already going on. We're going to be in partnership with those local programs, those barbershops, those schools. So deeply rooted is always partnership. And that goes all the way up to the top of the organization. And by that, I mean our national partners with the American Federation of Teachers, with the National Education Association, with tremendous companies like Disney and Pizza Hut and KPMG. These are leading corporations that have stepped up and in very organic ways have helped us in every category of what we do. Of course, they contribute financially, but they're also involved in strategy. They're also involved in thinking through our financial decisions. So our partnerships really span from that local teacher all the way up to very significant corporate people. And you also asked a question on sustainability, so I will say about that. First Book has never designed an idea that didn't have a sustainable economic model. That is who we are. That is the way we have done our business. So for the First Book Marketplace, for example, which is the oldest part of what we've done, that is it's an e-commerce site. I mean, it's nonprofit, but it's an e-commerce site. It moves approximately 17 million books. That's the predominant product through every single year. Those books are books that some are in part donated books and in part purchased books. We sell those books at the lowest possible cost we can manage, but there is a thin margin that supports the organization. First Book Research and Insights has a revenue strategy. We receive revenues from the research and the activities we do, the feedback loops we build for some of the businesses that come to us. And the accelerator also has a revenue strategy that involves sponsorship of packages that go through the accelerator, those expert packages that go through and are made available on the marketplace. Every single component has a revenue strategy. We are currently about 40% self-funded, and we are on a mission in the next 5 or 6 years to move that to 90%. And I'm quite certain that we'll make it, but that has to be at the heart.
Right. Thank you for answering those questions. And is the community? Can anyone join the community? I mean, there is, this mission of focusing on the underprivileged and the underserved communities. But if I'm an educator, how do I join, and are there any requirements to join this community?
I'm so glad you asked that, because I want everyone to join the community.
Yeah.
So anyone serving kids in need can join. It's free to join. It's about 6 or 7 minutes online. You have to either be a Title I, you have to be affiliated with a Title I or Title I eligible school. That's a poverty designation in the US. Or you have to be working with some kind of program or a business or anything that has at its heart, it is serving a minimum of 70% kids or families in need. We take a variety of metrics to prove that. And we have built behind the registration process several ways that are both, some are manual. We have spot checks, and we also have technology-based strategies that ensure that the registration makes sense. That it's a high poverty area, that they are who they say they are, that if there's a registration number available, that we have it, to prove their school identity, et cetera. So we do all that so that we are good gatekeepers. But yes, this is a movement, to use your phrase.
Right. So here I would request all members to wait until the talk is over before they go and register. Right? We don't want people immediately just leaving the webinar.
Yes, don't bail on the conversation, please. But you can find us, I should say, at www.firstbook.org. I should have said that 3 or 4 times by now. I forget to do that. But www.firstbook.org, and there's a registration page there.
Absolutely. And we'll be very happy to also share more information with the audience members also about First Book. And it's an absolutely phenomenal organization. And we believe everyone should definitely be part of it. One more question, which was there in my mind. I think this is something which you might have been asked a lot, or you might be asking this question a lot to yourself as well, as to what does the pandemic mean for children, for educational equity, and what does it also mean for First Book? So would you like to share more about how First Book has kind of adapted its work post the pandemic, and also what does the this whole large scale adoption of the digital mean for First Book, and is it an opportunity or a challenge?
Yeah, these are both really important questions. So first, the pandemic. I will say that the pandemic, of course, a crisis for every single one of us, and it made every issue of equity in education harder. We lost dramatic progress for our kids' trajectory on, in their educational trajectory. They lost a year, in many cases. And because of, and in fact, your 2 questions are related, because of the digital divide, because there were a lot of school systems where the kids in need just didn't have access to a computer, or had a computer but didn't have access consistently to Wi-Fi. And so it was catastrophic. And it also wasn't the crisis in education because of the pandemic wasn't limited to academic progress. There was a tremendous mental health implication for kids who were isolated from caring adults who form that circle around them. You know, every kid needs it. It's not even just it's not a poverty issue. Every kid needs these circles of caring adults who, you know, from one part of their lives to the next, who support them, who challenge them, who keep them safe. And and kids in need have less of those support systems. And so losing the primary one, losing access to that support system in the schools, and including their friends, by the way, that was catastrophic. And so we're seeing, and we will be seeing, these dramatic echoes of mental health that both are catastrophic to the individual, but also jeopardize their educational progress, because these are all sides of the same. You know, you've got to be healthy. You got to believe in yourself to be able to step out there and to achieve. And so all of these issues are related, and we're going to have to work our way through all of them. Now, to tell you the hopeful part, you know, we saw as everybody did, you know, in March and April, we saw all the schools began shutting down, everything began closing. And of course, that was the right decision. We have to preserve lives. But for First Book, that meant a primary access point to providing goods and resources, to getting feedback, was closing down. And we sent out a call to all of our network members and said, in the midst of the worst part of this, when we didn't know how this was transmitted, we were all afraid. Everybody's washing their groceries. Like, we didn't know how this, you know, we didn't have a vaccine. We didn't see a light at the end of the tunnel. And we sent out a missive and we said, we need help. And I'll tell you, Mashoud, that more than 8,000 people stepped up in our network, and they did the most extraordinary things. They set up distribution sites in their own homes, out of their garages, where people could drive by, the parents who they were serving, or walk by in the cities, and they would hand them, you know, brown bags with books that they'd chosen for their kids. We had teachers who would order a bunch of books through us, and then they would bag up the books and they would drop them off on the doorsteps of the students' homes. And it was to see the heroes, big and small, during this crisis. It was really inspiring. So it makes you feel like there's hope out there. And I will just say, on the digital front, we love books, whether they're digital. We love learning, whether it's digital, whether it's traditional. We love it in every form it can take. And so First Book actually has run the largest distribution project of digital books in the United States. We started under the Obama administration, but it has continued outside the government in all these intervening years. It's called Open eBooks, and it's involved the New York Public Library and Digital Public Library of America, and it's just been an extraordinary and very useful experience, both for us to learn and for the kids to receive digital books on their phones. So, we are out there, we're moving it in digital, we embrace it. Sure, it's a challenge, but we embrace it, and we're experimenting all the time with it.
That's absolutely phenomenal to know that the community really stepped up, and they were in a way on the front lines when the pandemic struck. So that's wonderful to know. Here I would like to now invite the convener here at Detox, Dr. Sunita Gandhi, as well. And Sunita ji, you've been listening to Kyle, and it's a people's movement. It is a movement which First Book has led, and highly disruptive movement, suits exactly with what we were thinking about here at Detox. Your questions and your thoughts for Kyle.
Kyle, it's super impressive what's going on. And with First Book, I think that nobody can doubt that this is path-breaking work. We're also, very, very pleased that you're on Detox, because this means that we in this part of the world get to hear about your great work and take inspiration from it. I was just curious to know whether you are working in the developing countries or the low income countries, and to what extent that is working, and how we can all, think of working together.
Well, the answer is not enough. We're not working enough outside the U.S. and Canada, and so I think that's something I'd love to have a conversation about. We've done things intermittently. We've been opportunistic about it when there's been a need, or there's been some funding, and we've worked through Ashoka and some other great organizations to make sure that we're working with people who are right on the ground in whichever country. But I think that these issues are global, and we have to, you have to start somewhere. So of course you start in your home country, but I think that where we all need to go is to, when we use the phrase "our children," we should not just mean the children in our country. We should be talking about our children globally. And so I really look forward to the day when we can, with strength, work with you guys and others to do this at a global level.
It'd be wonderful, because actually reading levels are pretty low, and with the COVID, it's really taken a hit. We are dealing with, there's some estimates that 80% of our primary grade children in India at the moment don't know how to read and write. And this is just phenomenal number of children. It's a whole nation in disarray when we talk about such large numbers or percentages of children who don't have the wherewithal to read, as well as the capacity to read. So a big challenge for us. But I think it'd be great if we can learn the ropes from you. Create a chapter of your organization here, or do something where, yes, so that we can follow those ideas at a different economic level. Similar lessons. What in your experience and research has worked really well of the kinds of things you're doing, and how you're implementing change? Is there data in terms of what percentage of children have started to read, or to what extent this program has created greater opportunity for the children?
Well, I think it's a twofold set of opportunities, right? One is for the educators, because in the U.S. I think there is a perception from outside the U.S. looking in. I think there's a perception that the streets are paved with gold a bit, right? And when in fact, the teachers are underpaid. And have been for many, many years. There are some things that we're quite good at, but a lot of things we really struggle with. Access to books is there was one study in Washington D.C. when it wasn't our study, but a close ally. They showed that there was one in the homes and informal settings. There was one book for every 831 kids in an impoverished area of Washington, and you can't. And so when you're looking at those kinds of numbers, you can't teach a kid to play the piano without a piano. You can't teach a kid to love books and stories without, it's the implications of that kind of desert are profound. And we can't, we're still looking at 80% of fourth graders in the US, fourth graders in poverty, are not reading proficiently. And 80%. I mean, so, but that's of people in poverty, but, so it parallels your numbers in a lot of ways. For impact for First Book, we don't run reading tests. That's sort of not our role in the world. That's not our data point. What we focus on is how many educators are we serving? How many books are we getting out there? How many strategies, cutting edge strategies, are we getting into the hands of those programs so that we elevate everything that's going on in those settings? And that, we're running, we've done 200 million books over the course of our history of our organization. We provide about 17 million annually books, which is great. That's all great. But important too on this is, how do we change the publishing industry? And that's something that we also focus on. We focus on the educator and the child, but we also say, how can we use the big levers to move the industry? How do we push them to make their content more culturally relevant to our audience of kids? Because historically in the US, books have been by and about white people. And that's not shocking when you look at the fact that that the average price of a premium picture book is $19, right? And it's because what that means is, historically, that's been their audience, is affluent white audience. And it's not any different than any other industry. Every industry tends to tailor its products to to their customer base. But it's a horrifying thing that needs to be resolved. It's a horrifying implications for the kids we're serving, where people of color are much more highly represented in our network. And so our ability to take that aggregated voice and push the industry to change their content, to issue less expensive editions, paperback editions of the spectacular books, to really move the big levers in society. Those are our points of impact, and we leave the literacy testing to the experts.
Right. Thank you, Kyle, for those perspectives. I think here we would like to take one concluding question, and there's a member from the audience who's asked us this question. Shifali Jaiswal, who's saying, what are the ways schools or government can promote social entrepreneurship? And I think in a way, this is one question which we were also interested to ask was, how does government policy help foster young social entrepreneurs? And I mean, people who see you as a role model of a social entrepreneur, how can policy help foster them, and how do we bring more young people into this this mission of universal foundational literacy and numeracy? What would your message be to policymakers and the young people? Yeah,
this is so important. This is so important. It might be the most important thing, and I think that part of it is exactly what you guys are already doing. You are reaching out. You are pushing for collaboration. You're reaching across topic lines and country borders, and you're elevating the narrative, you're elevating the discussion. That contributes, and that's an essential thing. So bravo to what you're doing right now. To ask about schools, I will say, we have to raise, in every single country, we have to raise a generation of change makers. Every young person needs to feel their power. They need, and through Ashoka, I'm on the global board of Ashoka and have been for, a couple of decades. And I love the organization. If you don't know about it, please check it out. But they have been running a program focused on young change makers, and they've been reaching into countries, the US, yes, but also Brazil and Indonesia and several others. And First Book has now begun working with them in our accelerator model framework, where we are able to take their great learnings on how can a teacher elevate their students' as change makers and move that into classrooms and programs. That's a message that it's critical for the kids to feel that they can change their homes, they can change their lives, they can change their communities. It's critical to democracy, and that's what it's all about. I mean, there might be nothing more important, and of course they can't do that if they're or they can't do it as easily if they're not literate, if they don't have the fundamentals of their education in order. All these things are related. So I think that we need to use all our channels to support educators in doing that. From a governmental side, how can government support the social entrepreneurs? You know, there are going to be differences in every country as to the barriers for social enterprise. I think we have to, as a field, we have to say to ourselves, what are the barriers to being a social entrepreneur? And we can steal like crazy from other fields. You know, I'm a lawyer. There's a bar association in the US. There's a bar association globally. You know, these are professional societies that support the development of the field. We need more of that. We have Ashoka. They do fabulous work in that area, but we need more of that so that we can support each other. From a government perspective, another significant barrier is money, not just funding, not just as a grantor, but to build a financial structure underneath the sector. It is very difficult to get an impact loan. I know that field is bubbling along, but when in the private sector, on the corporate side, there are all kinds of governmental things that happen. In the US, they have the Small Business Administration, and it gives out loans and guarantees to small businesses that are private sector, small businesses in the US. That has fostered enormous growth in the small business sector, but you can't get a loan from them if you're a nonprofit. So we have to look at what government has done. They've subsidized the agriculture industry. They've subsidized the auto industry. They do this all over the world. Every country with a big economic engine uses those levers to subsidize sectors that are important to the evolution of the country. They do not effectively do that in our sector. Europe is better than the US at doing it right now, but we need to steal those strategies and apply them, and it's going to take all of us screaming and yelling to get it done. So I think that's a very, very important step we need to take collectively.
Thank you so much, Kyle, for such a rich medley of perspectives, and this conversation has been really thought triggering, and to all those who will be watching this video in the future as well, and those who are watching this live, I'm sure that before they go on to the first book, Marketplace, they are, I'm sure, more convinced about being a social entrepreneur, right? So any fence sitter, I think, would be absolutely convinced to go into the field of social enterprise now. Thank you so much, Ms. Kyle Zimmer. I think it's been an absolute pleasure having you here, and Dr. Sunita Gandhi as well. Thank you for your questions and thoughts. And we hope that more and more people, as to quote Kyle herself, where she said that every community needs to have a generation of change makers, and that's what I think all of us here in our small capacity can try and do as well in our individual capacity. So on that note, thank you once again to all of you who are joining, and we'll meet you tomorrow in the next session of DJobs.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much, and great work. So keep it up.
Thank you, Kyle. You've inspired us beyond any